together this video to help clear up some misconceptions and errors that go along with the absolute and comparative advantage lesson. Let's start out with this example here and make sure that we understand absolute advantage. So in this case, we'll have the United States and country A, and they're going to make either lawnmowers or cars. And this is one of the things I think confuses students, and the lesson doesn't do a very good job making clear. These countries aren't going to make lawnmowers or cars. Sorry, and cars. They're going to make lawnmowers or cars with their resources. It's saying that with the number of people they have and maybe factory facilities they have, they can make lawnmowers in 3 days or cars in 6 days. It's not an and situation. So what that means is they have to choose to make one or the other. And the whole idea of these absolute and comparative advantage examples is this is why they're going to trade with country A. So we have to determine who should make which thing. Okay, so in each of these, whether we're talking absolute advantage or comparative advantage, you can't have this like, well, perhaps country A has comparative advantage in this, or it's it has to, one of them has to have the comparative advantage in lawnmowers, and the other has to have comparative advantage in cars, or vice versa. They're going to trade. One is going to produce one of these goods, and the other is going to produce the other. It's not a matter of the United States can just make lawnmowers or cars. This is all about opportunity cost. If the U.S. is going to make lawnmowers, their opportunity cost is cars. Or if country A is going to produce cars, then their opportunity cost is the lawnmowers that they can produce. Okay, so let's help understand which thing which country should produce. Now, if we look at absolute advantage, that just tells us who is best at making each good. So in this case, we can see that the U.S. makes lawnmowers in 3 days, but it takes country A 4 days. So we say the United States has absolute advantage in lawnmowers. They can do it 1 day quicker than country A. If we look at cars, it takes the United States 6 days, but country A 10 days. So again, the United States has absolute advantage in making cars. So the U.S. is better in both, but that doesn't help you then decide which country should make which thing. I mean, if you're just looking at who does it better, the United States could make both of them better. That's why we have to look at comparative advantage to figure out who should make which thing and trade it with the other country for their opportunity cost. All right. So to do that, it's a pretty simple method to be able to do that. There's several ways of doing it. This course uses this technique, which is pretty easy. So all we're going to do, we have to determine what is the cost of each country of their opportunity cost. So in other words, if the U.S. produces cars at the opportunity cost of lawnmowers, how expensive is that for them to do that? And if country A makes cars at the opportunity cost of lawnmowers, how expensive is it for them to do that? So we can determine that expense of what they're giving up by just determining the difference in working days, or in your assignment in the lesson, it's number of hours. So here we can see that if the U.S. produces cars at the opportunity cost of lawnmowers, then that should cost them 3 working days. The difference is 3 working days. If country A makes cars instead of lawnmowers, that's a difference of 6 working days. So we want to be the most efficient. Then we want to make our decisions on who should make what based on what is the lowest or the cheapest cost for the opportunity cost. And we can simply just see that by, well, the U.S., for the U.S. to make cars, they're only giving up 3 working days for lawnmowers. But for country A to do it, it's 6. So since 3 is the lowest number, then the U.S. has comparative advantage in cars, and country A has comparative advantage in lawnmowers. All right, so the things to remember is that the U.S. can't have comparative advantage in both. One country has to do one, the other country has to do the other, because what's implied here is they are going to only, each country it can only make one thing, and they are going to trade with each other. So the other country has to make the other. It's just a matter of figuring out the best combination to do that so that you get the most efficient way for them to produce together. So in this case, what would end up happening is that the U.S. would make cars in 6 days. So every 6 days, they'd be able to make a car. So let's say they're going to make 2 cars in 12 days. And while country A works on making lawnmowers, and in that same 12 days, country A is going to make 3 lawnmowers. And then the U.S. is going to trade one of those cars for, well, in this case, it would be like 1.5 lawnmowers. This must be really good lawnmowers, but it's all just theoretical anyways. Now we can see the same thing, just as a final example. We can see the same thing maybe on a personal level. That we actually do this kind of all the time in our life. So I've put this example is, let's talk about maybe you and maybe you have a sibling and you have some chores to do at home. And how do you split that up to most effectively get it done? So let's say in this case that you've got some chores to do. You have to do the dishes and you have to do the vacuuming before you can leave the house for the day to go do something you and your sibling really want to do. So let's figure out the quickest way to do that. See, notice it wouldn't make, this is why we talk about like one's going to do one thing and the other person's going to do the other. It doesn't make sense for just you to do both chores while your sibling sits there and watches you before you can go. Because first of all, even if it did, if it takes you 15 minutes to do the dishes and it takes you 20 minutes to do the vacuuming, well, then you're waiting around 35 minutes before you're going to be able to leave. And all the time you're doing all the work and your sibling just sits and stares at you. So A, not efficient, and B, not fair. So we're going to determine who should do which chore to get you out of the house the quickest. We can see from this that you have absolute advantage in both tasks. You could do the dishes in 15 minutes, but it takes your sibling 20, so you have absolute advantage in dishes. You also are quicker at vacuuming with an absolute advantage at 20, whereas your sibling does 30. So again, we said you don't want to do both because you're going to sit around 35 minutes and it's not fair. So you have to figure out the one thing you have comparative advantage in and the one thing that your sibling has comparative advantage in. So if we use this method that we used up here, it should be pretty easy to figure out. If you do the vacuuming instead of the dishes, that's only going to cost you 5 minutes of extra time. Whereas if your sibling did the vacuuming instead of dishes, it's going to take them 10 extra minutes to do that. So it's looking to me like that's going to be, 5 more minutes of you guys before you can leave. All right, so in that case, we see that we want the cheapest cost for our opportunity cost here, and that's the 5. So that means you should do the vacuuming, and your sibling should do the dishes. And notice now that you are out of the house. So you're going to take 20 minutes to do the vacuuming. Your sibling's going to take the same 20 minutes to do the dishes. You're out of the house in 20 minutes. That is why you trade based on comparative advantage. Hope that helps clear up some stuff. Let me know if I can provide further assistance.